All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the DevOps Insights Forum. It's a monthly open space where professionals talk about software development, delivery, and reliability. My name is Sam Fell. I'm super excited to be here today. Today's topic, I think, is one that's very topical, very in the news right now, reliability management. And the idea here is to keep modern, complex, and continuously changing applications running. It's not an easy task. Most operate by going from one fire drill to the next. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Reliability management helps shift teams from a reactive to a proactive stance so they can provide a fantastic digital experience and mitigate service disruptions. Join this panel as we discuss how service levels and error budgets align your organization, ways to get started with reliability management, and organizational best practices and patterns that can help aid your success. We've got a fantastic panel of folks. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with our buddy Mitch Ashley. Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Sam, always good to be with you, and thanks for pulling together this illustrious panel. I'm Mitch Ashley. I am principal with TechStrong Research, focusing on DevOps and cloud-native digital transformation cybersecurity. I also serve as CTO for the company that puts on the technology we use for today's webinar. So good to be with you and everybody.
So the reliability of the webinar, we can thank you for that.
We'll see at the end. I'll let you know.
Yeah, love it. All right, Mitch, welcome. Paula. Welcome.
Yeah, hi, Paula Thrasher. I'm the Senior Director for Infrastructure and Security at PagerDuty. I own our site reliability engineering team, among other things. And prior to that, I used to work at some large enterprises, United Technologies and GDIT being two of them, leading some large DevOps transformations. So fun topic.
Lovely. Excellent. Glad to have you join us. Bruno, howdy.
Hello. Good to see you. Many of you for not just the first time, and hopefully some of the audience as well. I'm Bruno. I'm one of the founders and Chief Strategy Officer at Sumo Logic. We are an observability and security platform that our customers use for reliability and security management of their mission-critical applications. So I look forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Mr. Basil, welcome.
Hi, Michael Basil, Cloud Systems Agent and SAP Dojo Curator. Home Group is the Fieldglass line of business, where I've been focusing on working with the group to, and through a DevOps transformation that's well on its way. And then we're shifting our focus a little bit, or adding our focus to start to infuse site reliability practices and just kind of get the cultural shift going. So it's been a really fun experience, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So much experience on the panel. Last but not least, J. Paul Reed. Paul, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Sam. My name is J. Paul Reed. I'm a senior applied resilience engineer at Netflix. I work on the core team, which stands for Critical Operations and Reliability Engineering. We like to describe ourselves as a team that holds the pager for Netflix. So if there's an issue on the service, we're generally the first in the company to know about it. We might be the second because the service team that's having a problem might get paged first, but we corral everyone together and do the incident response there, and then do the follow-up work to make sure that that doesn't happen again for our watchers, our viewers.
That's wonderful. Yeah, when you think about reliability and how to make that real and present in the lives of our viewers, have their buffering go on in whatever platform they're using, and then that'll tell you, right? Mm-hmm. And just to be honest, I have not had any problems with Netflix in the longest time. So I don't know what you're doing over there, but keep it up. Awesome. Okay, so very quickly before we jump into some of the data, Mitch and the team at TechStrong have done a little pulse survey for us, which is awesome. I want to share with the audience here. I see people already joining in the chat. That's so fantastic. This whole program is designed for the audience. We have all of this knowledge on this panel. Ask questions, put in your comments, put your thoughts in there. Be respectful, because if you're not, we're just going to kick you. And share feedback. If you have ideas on how we can make this better, we're continuously improving organization. And so we want to do that. So warm up the chat. Tell us where you're joining us from, and let's get ready to have an awesome conversation. So Mitch, it's time to start talking about some of this data. We have some polling questions set up. I think Cody's got some polling questions for us. And
There
so
we
you
go.
folks in the audience, if you would, let's just get a baseline of where everybody is. So how well do you understand SRE? You live and breathe it. You've read about it. You've sort of heard about it, but never really read about it. Or SR what? I don't even know what the SR is. I'm gonna put mine in there. I'm gonna put my answer in there and see what folks come back with.
Yep. Everybody jump in. Please vote. We'll keep it
Yeah.
open for a few more
For a few
seconds here.
Yeah.
Looks like we're getting some
You
good
know,
responses.
Okay, interesting. Just starting. They've read about it. Just starting. Okay. So pretty much most people have heard about SRE. There's not a lot of the SR what. I answered that one because I think it's a funny answer, not because it's scientific and it's accurate. So I'm screwing up the poll, and I admit that. So maybe the transparency, does that help? So
Appreciate that.
read about SRE just starting. So that's where the majority of the folks out there are. So that's fantastic. What did we see? Pretty similar in the Pulse poll that we did. We had 400 people answer that Pulse poll on the DevOps.com website.
Right.
And so does this surprise anybody that's actually very interesting?
Well, it's rare that we don't get exactly the same distribution, plus or minus. Today, we actually did.
Yes.
Today, we actually have the first and second answers reversed, which is
absolutely. And I'm also noticing, and I don't know if this makes a difference, but I'm noticing we have a very international audience today. Holy cow. We got people from all over. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the polling didn't, on the website didn't hit that many people. I don't know.
We have a very international audience on DevOps.com. So it's maybe a lot has happened in the week.
Right.
Since we ran the polls. You never know.
That's right. So in the chat, folks, give us a sense of where you heard about SRE. Did you hear about it from work? Did you hear about it from a peer of yours? Did you just go out looking for it because you were interested? Put a comment in the chat there.
And I would be curious from the audience when you say just starting, what does that mean for you? What does just starting actually mean in terms of what you're doing?
That's a great question. So what's your gut reaction to the concept of service level agreements? You can either be very excited about it, yeah, or you could be kind of terrified or kind of not so happy about it. Ugh. Right? And so let us know what your thoughts are. Yeah or ugh.
I think it makes a difference if you're the receiver or the sender of the service on this too. Maybe we're sometimes on both sides.
Or the procurement negotiator of the contractor.
Yeah, exactly.
I once did a presentation called "The Tyranny of the SLA," so I think you know where I stand on that.
I'm kind of in your camp.
Yeah.
If you have those slides, I would love to read them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll dig up I'll tweet the presentation. I think I got recorded.
I would love to read those. That would be awesome.
So participant 23, I'm surprised Live and Breathe SRE is that high. I've not seen much evidence. Normally rebadged ITIL. Very interesting.
Rebadged ITIL. Yeah.
It's a good point.
That assumes people were doing idle right the first time.
Well,
yeah, or if there's a way to do idle right. If there's 1,000 different ways of doing it wrong.
That too.
So we're like spot on here.
Yeah.
Like 65% yay on the audience. So
this one seems about right. Paul, you must have influenced a few people, which is fine, right? But it's interesting that there are folks, right, that the living and breathing was as high as it was, but there's still so much about it, right? So maybe SRE and SLA is not equated in people's minds. It's interesting. And so the final one is how deep have you gotten into this? Do you have SLOs or SLIs defined for the applications that you support? Yes, no, or work in progress? And let's see what the audience says.
I have a theory about the high response on the SLAs.
Okay.
We're going to talk about reliability and resilience. And then maybe in that shift, as we think about this shift to more resilient software, SLAs have a little different meaning in that context. not just 5 nines, the old reliability standard.
I didn't put a note in the sticky chat, so I'm doing that now. All the votes come in. Work in progress. Okay, so there's a considerable number of people who are work in progress. They may have a few, but it's a work in progress, and that's okay, right? It's a journey, and we're all on the journey. And so that's what this conversation is going to be about, is getting to those SLOs and SLIs for the applications that you support. Thanks for joining. Let us know where you are joining from in chat. Boom. All right. And so, interesting. Similar work in progress was, again, the larger with, a similar breakdown of the yes or no. So the audience out there is excited, folks. They're excited about the idea of reliability management. A lot of them have heard about it or are doing stuff with it. And some of them even have SLOs or SLIs for the applications they support. So we understand our audience.
Sam.
I'm sorry, what?
You just jumped to a conclusion that they're excited.
I did. I'm
know.
putting that in there because I want them to be excited by this. I think this is a pretty cool topic.
It's a great topic.
I will stop interrupting.
Yes, that's okay. I appreciate it. That's the point of this, is to keep the ideas flowing. So you mentioned this earlier, reliability, resilience. So what do these mean to you? What do they mean to your business? And how are these things, how are you thinking about them within the confines of the jobs that you have to do? Reliability, resilience, and SRE. So Mitch, I'm going to start with you. You're the first one on my list.
Yeah, I was kind of intimating there back with that second poll question. There's a lot of movement right now of kind of rethinking the standard 5 nines, the reliability of applications uptime as the kind of main metrics. And while that's still important, we think about customer experience measures. We think about, no software is perfect. Every software is going to fail for lots of good reasons. So let's build software that's more resilient. So there's a lot of emphasis on the SRE role and how that can help improve in that resilience. Now, you might argue it has to kind of start also in the design of the software as well, but it's some of both. And I think that's one of the things that's exciting audiences about SRE is it's not just idle. It's not just ops, monitoring, alerts, et cetera. There's really a chance to make a difference in a new way. And one of those is this idea of resilience.
And that resilience comes from the systems being resilient, the people and the systems being resilient, the combination of those two things. What is the...
Well, it is processes also, very much so. But I think it's also, we think about application performance monitoring as a sort of an old category that we've had for a long time. And now we think about it in terms of, what's the customer experience and how... I think we were talking about Netflix earlier before we were stopping. We used to get the spinning ball, spinning icon a lot. That doesn't happen much for people. At least it hasn't for me. I think you mentioned that too. That's a sign of resilience, right? Because it's not working perfectly. We know that. But there's good things happening or good work that's happened that help all of that be able to respond accordingly when there are issues.
Yeah, Bruno, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so... Paul, I'll pass you the ball.
I was just going to mention one fun little fact. You were talking about the nines, and from an availability reporting perspective, we haven't really used the nines as a communication tool throughout the organization for at least as long as I've been there. And the reason is, if you look at that number, it's 99.99. It fluctuates from 992 to 998. And so when you're looking at that small of a deviation over months, the problem with that is it doesn't actually inform any behaviors that you would want anyone to do, right? Now, I know Netflix is a little weird, but I bring that up to make the point that you can get to a space where, as you were saying, the nines actually aren't useful to making decisions.
Because you're so optimized that you have such a channel of performance that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody in the audience is like, yeah, we're there too. Right? Yeah, I know you are. It's okay.
In spirit.
I got you, Pat.
When I look at these terms, seems to me that reliability, and I'll talk about what it means to sumo logic, but kind of just generally, seems to me that reliability is maybe an externally facing property, customer facing property. You know, does a customer find the application reliable? Resilience seems to be more internally facing property, meaning how does the system behave? What do I need to do to keep it running and things like that? And then SRE is a methodology, right? So like, I think they're both important. I was just trying to think, you know, if I had to pick one, what would I pick? And I just can't decide. For us, we both build a resilient system because we really don't want to be up on keyboards at all times trying to keep it running. We want the system to take care of itself. We want it to bounce back from failures. You know, as far as, you know, we go as far as making sure that the entire physical location can go down and our system keeps running. Now, during those times when even though the system keeps running, is it reliable? Well, yes, but it might take some slowdown while it's spinning up capacity in another physical location, right? To essentially to be resilient towards that failure, it's trying to grab compute somewhere else where when it detects that somewhere else it's failed. And we might have a slowdown, which affects reliability, but the system is resilient, right? Because it is doing something about the issue. At least that's how I think about it. I don't know. I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, I'd like to dovetail on that. So we're faced with, you know, like we're working on a cultural shift in a few groups, and you know, so the question is like, you know, we utilize a dojo style to get the first, you know, the eager beavers kind of moving, and what are we going to call the practice? And we meditated on this quite a bit or contemplated at least, and we decided resilience is the practice and reliability is the outcome that gets realized through that. So we want to, you know, and while I think the numbers are important signals in the quantification, I think the metaphor of what are we trying to do? If we're, you know, the Titanic is not resilient, okay? But a cork floating in water is, right? So like it can handle a lot of different types of unexpected events, and then allows us to, you know, so we're trying to get people to conceptualize when they're building things out, a resilient system that like it's just not heavy. We're just lighten it up. Like think about what that is. So we try to push through on the metaphor, and then see how we're doing with you know, kind of with the numbers, and then like reliability is a perspective, right? It's a perception of, you know, a customer thinking it's reliable, and kind of work from there.
Exactly. That's also a thing, right? That appearance of making things look reliable because you've made them resilient to specific errors or problems, which is another whole domain that it's just amazing.
Yeah.
So
I was going to add in just as a point that, like, I think a big piece of reliability, some people talk about like, well, it's preventing failures. It's not actually preventing failures. It's gracefully recovering or ensuring that failure states don't impact the customer experience. Things fail. They will fail. That is not. And right. I have to sometimes dissuade folks that the purpose of reliability engineering is to prevent failure. Because I think that like is a big, I think it's probably one of the biggest misconceptions in the space is that, oh, well, you're reliable if you don't fail. That's not necessarily true, right? And actually it's is as important to fail a lot potentially, but do so in a way that there are, you know, it's, you know, that there are backup systems, so that there's a recoverable, graceful way of delivering an experience in the face of failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there failure with grace? Gracefully, you know, how would you?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the cork versus the Titanic. I'm sure if you know, if I'm here in New York, if I dropped a cork in the Hudson River, it will probably bob under the water, but come back up, right? Is that okay?
We're always fighting like the need, like people's need to be perfect. So like, if I can just make it not ever break, it's like, right. Okay, that's kind of the problem. That can be not the problem. That is a hindrance towards a system that's really resilient.
Yeah, I actually think that's an anti-pattern because if you build a system assuming it's never going to fail, when it does fail, bad things are probably going to happen.
Mhm.
That's right. Yeah, if you read the Google SRE handbook, they talk about this system. I think it's called Chubb or something that was so reliable that they would end up taking it down in order to use the error budget to force systems that were dependent on it to figure their stuff out, to make sure that they weren't dependent on it in a way that was, not resilient and
Right.
not flexible. And so there are these practices that people are coming up with, and we're talking about this. We actually have another episode next month for those who want to join on chaos engineering. So that's going to be really cool. But all these practices to break things in order to make them better. That sounds like it's an anti-pattern, but it's the best way of doing things. Playing with the systems. That's how we all learn, is by playing. So it's really, really cool.
I
Paul.
wanted to dovetail off of something Michael said because I have a background in safety science, and the safety science perspective, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but I give a presentation on what I call the R word. So robustness, reliability, and resilience. And so from a safety science perspective, and these are people that studied 3 Mile Island, they studied Chernobyl, right? A lot of aviation folks, a lot of medical folks. One of the key differences between reliability and resilience, at least in their framing, is a great thing is resilience is not something you have. Resilience is something you do. It is a verb. And so when you talk about a resilient system, you actually can't talk about a resilient system without really talking about a resilient socio-technical system, because it has the people that are involved doing the thing that make it reliable. And then robustness is a different property too. And so the thing that I love about actually, Michael, what you said, especially from a dojo perspective, and when you talk about bringing resilience to a system, it really is what you were referring to, that sort of cultural mind shift, a shift in practices, because it's something people do. So you can't get resilience if you're not talking about the people.
The SRE.
Awesome. That's awesome. I'm from Chicago, so like Michael Jordan, right? Like you're setting yourself up for high quality shots, right? And then some of them go in, and that looks reliable. That's how I kind of sell it to the people in Chicago a little bit about like committing to the practice. We commit to the practice. We commit to the practice, and we learn from the numbers.
They commit to Michael Jordan, but you just swap out Michael Jordan with reliability management.
There you go. I'm from Chicago.
I get it. I'm from Chicago also.
Brilliant. I think it's a great approach.
Is it wrong that, I was wondering what kind of shots people take in Chicago when you said that?
Yes. Yes.
That's very
awesome. Okay.
So
we're not ahead, is what I'll say on the topics, but that's fine. All right. So now we're going down maybe a level into more of the mechanics. SLI, SLO, SLA, air budget. What does it all mean? So in the chat, folks, are you familiar with these terms? Have you heard these terms? Is this something that you want to sort of have us dive into? Who should I pick on? Who wants to give us an outline of what these things are? Paula, can you define SLO, SLA, and SLI for us, please? You're muted, so it's going to make it tough.
Here we go. Okay, sorry.
All right.
Find the mute button real quick. That's my service level indicator. That's a metrics. SLO is the objective, and SLA is the punishment. No.
That's going to get people.
I mean, yeah, right. So I guess the idea is most typically SLA is where you're held accountable. That tends to be contractual. SLO in practice is what you do internally in terms of a number you're trying to manage internally to make sure you don't miss your SLA. And then SLI is one of those measures that leads up to that. So that's my in practice version.
I love it. That's perfect. And so you folks are are you using some of this at PagerDuty?
Yeah, we are. We already have, I actually just to sort of talk to 2 SLAs. So it's not always uptime. I think one of the things that I think about that whole 5 nines thing is sometimes that's a little bit oriented in what I call like server land, where like, is the light blinking green or red? And that doesn't necessarily mean that the service is working. So ours are based on both, is it available? Can you do things? But also for us, notifications, notifying you that you're having an incident. If I notify you and I don't know, 3 days from now, that's probably not helpful. So we have a notification standard of within 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So we're measuring the duration, and that's, I think, impactful for a lot of organizations that have some digital experience. It's not just, is the system up? It's, can the user engage in a digital experience within, whatever is a reasonable time frame for that experience. How long before the Netflix page loads, how long before the shopping cart times out, that kind of thing. So for us, some of the measures depend on, the aspect of the system we're trying to measure. So obviously notifications, there's measurement of how many notifications go without, outside of a certain SLO. There's measuring errors in the system rather than straight up down, right? Because we're trying to proactively look for indicators of issues before they become, the SLO.
And underneath that service level, then there are other monitors and things on different teams that they're looking at the sub components of that make up that experience. But ultimately what you care about is, are those alerts getting to the users in a timely fashion?
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that we've started doing a little bit too is, once upon a time, the Site Reliability Organization kind of dictated to the teams, here's your SLO kind of thing. And we, like a lot of companies, we've got multiple teams working on multiple things now, and there's a scaling factor. And one of the things we're trying to do is make sure teams really understand those numbers and internalize them, as opposed to the big boss told me to measure this. And so we've asked teams to kind of give their own lens based on what service they own, to say, is your SLO, okay, first off, it needs to be measurable. Obviously, it's kind of if it's a measurement, you need to measure it. It needs to be meaningful. And obviously that's something that it depends on what's meaningful for each service. It needs to be attainable. Obviously, if your service can't hit that standard, you don't want to measure something you're going to fail at. And if it's, not attainable, it should be, that's a different issue. It also needs to be understandable. I think that's actually the fact that you can communicate it to other people is a really important, can somebody else look at your SLO dashboard and understand what that thing is describing about your service? And it needs to be something that is repeatable. You can consistently hit this, this metric. And so we've asked teams to kind of look across the SLOs that they have. And as we have a practice we call Failure Friday, which I'll defer and talk about that a little bit later, but we have, kind of chaos engineering. We regularly test the system. So we ask people during those tests to make sure that one of the things they're gaining out of that rehearsal process is a validation that they're measuring the right kinds of things to make sure their system is reliable. It's not just testing, is the system up or down? It's testing the entire resilience ecosystem that team is trying to operate in to manage a strong, reliable service.
So you're going to throw a wrench in, you may as well throw a big wrench, right?
Yeah, I was just going to add on or highlight something you mentioned, Paul, about the meaningfulness of the SLO or SLA. Another way of phrasing that is, why is this important? Why do we care?
Yeah.
And oftentimes there's a lot of legacy momentum history around certain metrics that is what we're talking about uptime, before, or 5 nines kind of thing. Why do we measure that? Is it still relevant? Is it telling us anything? And I think one of the shifts that's happening is in some of the metrics that we're using, we're starting to do a better job of connecting the dots back to the business or back to the user experience. Not everything is about a user experience metric, but the business is starting to recognize that there's groups within the technology organizations who are actually able to give them some data about this. And I think as that builds, there's going to be a huge amount of interest from new parts of the business in the kind of SRE camp and what's happening, and can you help us with this? And we see that happening in the market, the market the Sumo's in. So it's a great thing, and I think that's one of the cool things about SRE and what it's really done for the operations function, if you will, if we can categorize it that way. I'm not sure it's that way anymore, but
Yeah, and I'll add even actually on the meaningfulness, because we've had this come up, and I think this is probably true for a lot of companies. You know, we're not a super old company. We've been around for 13 years. That's not very long in the it's long by internet standards, maybe not by SAP standards, for instance. But you know, what we do as a company evolves, and so meaningful does actually change over time, right? I think as you introduce new capabilities to market, you might we found that, like, even just from customer feedback, they care about more things, and so we're starting to say, do we need new SLOs, new SLAs to match what people are now experiencing in terms of the capability? You know, is it time to revisit and update these things and maybe add things that we weren't, you know, previously paying as close attention to, because they're more meaningful now that we've got these different practices. So I think just a point that, like, I hope most people's digital services are not a static point in time. Maybe resonated a little bit with the folks that answered that it was a work in progress, not because still working on it, but because if you're
Always
changing, it's always a work.
continuously, right? Yeah,
Good point.
exactly. So, Paul, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, no, I was going to give an example of that because I think Bruno and Mitch had said earlier, I think you had said too, that, you know, Netflix doesn't buffer for me as much as it used to. And I can tell you that when our customers were experiencing that, we really did focus on that stream start experience, right? Is it buffering what's going on there? But over time, as that's become, you know, more reliable, right, if you will, one of the things, and to Paula's point, one of the evolution of the metrics is, if you've ever seen photos on Twitter where the recommendations from Netflix look really real. So one of my favorite ones is, because you watched Airplane Disasters and it suggested Moana. And I was like, that's weird, right? But I was actually talking to, this was before I worked at Netflix. I was talking to a friend at Netflix, and he said it's not widely known that if a particular service can't deliver your personalized recommendations, there's a cache of just whatever the popular 10 movies is or are right now. And so one of the things that we start to measure now is how often was that fallback engaged?
Interesting.
And if that goes out of, you know, you're always going to get some noise in that metric. But if we see, and I'll give you an example, right? We were seeing a spike in that fallback at a certain time. And it turned out it was because that's when a particular service was hit more than you know it normally is. So it would fall back. And so that was an evolution of that metric where we were able to find that out in this huge complex system. Because we were looking at actually when the fallbacks were engaged, when we didn't expect them to be.
Because you'd hidden the impact from the end user, and the systems, the monitoring that was happening of the systems wasn't necessarily surfacing that failure mode.
Right. We wouldn't get calls from people. I mean,
Right.
You know, you might get one or two calls, but you wouldn't see like a customer support, you know,
Right.
call spike, which we actually monitor that too, right?
Sure.
And so you had to, you know, it's exactly what Paula said. We had to start thinking about what are the different metrics. And, you know, to Mitch's point, it becomes more around the quality of the customer experience, right? And what is the customer actually trying to achieve with the product?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
I've got a couple of thoughts here. This is all good stuff. So when, you know, thinking of a previous experience when I was with McMillan Learning as a senior director, and then contrasting that with my experiences at SAP, and I kind of see like at a low level, what's happening is people typically, like the typical director of operations or engineering, they're like, how do I just make everything as good as possible? Like, it's just like, it's always trying to have like, you know, just get that number as low as possible. When you start to look at the term error budget, like that change, like people don't get it. Like, it's just like, wait, error and budget. We would want errors to be 0. It's like, well, actually, no, there's a budget. Wait, what? There's a budget, right? So like when you start to do high quality signals, and a few of them, because a few to start, just a couple even, like, because they start to create back pressure. And then the people making the decisions, you know, or influencing decisions, start to use the data to make risk-informed decisions Should we pull back, hit the brakes, or should we hit the gas? Do we need to rotate people more towards, stable, doing some things to help stabilize and make the system be more responsive, like Paul was talking about, so it's not falling back as much? Do we need to, deprioritize features for stability? And so it changes the whole way you approach how you make your decisions about where you prioritize resources and how aggressive or conservative you are with your releases. That's how we look at it.
That's great. So you're actively using that error budget to help inform the velocity that you're able to go based on how stable everything is.
That's right. It creates back pressure, for example, on the sprint backlog.
Mm-hmm.
It creates it's like instead of rotating around one star, you're kind of rotating around two.
There's balance.
So you have these right. It becomes a much more balanced approach to delivery.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
One about 6-7 years ago, I was working at a federal agency where they were an early adopter of Agile and DevOps practices, and one of the things that they introduced that I think was a really interesting take on a way to do that was they had this sort of team managed deployment model, which was, the normal process of deploying an update went through this, bureaucratic checkbox of the millions of people that had to sign off on this thing. And it took a while. It took almost 2 weeks just to collect signatures, right? Not even, so continuous delivery, forget it. You just spent 2 weeks getting
continuous delay.
Right. Continuous signatures, right? But they decided that they were going to have a fast track version of this where we automated and we were using a system where, people could kind of virtually sign off and we could go quickly. And basically that there was a streamlined version based on, were your last 10 deployments error-free? Did you have, your staging? There was sort of a set of reliability, rubrics based on, quantity of customer support calls, quantity, was the thing error-free? And if you stayed good, you could go through the fast track. And it was purely just sort of a sticks carrots version that said, as long as you stay stable, you get to go through the fast track. And the second you have an error, you're back to the slow train. You have to have 10 good deployments before you can go back to the fast train again. And I will tell you that as a human psychology, to Paul's point about the humans are a big part of the reliability system, everyone was really motivated to, and it was interesting too, because you got like 3 bogeys in staging too. So it wasn't just, the production had to be 0 errors, but you could, staging errors, you could only collect 3 staging errors before you were back on the slow train. And so teams would get 1 staging error and they would start finger pointing, and they get 2, and then they would stop, and everything would everybody was okay, don't screw up. You've got 1. It's like when you forget your password and you're staring at the screen, you've got 1 chance left. Teams' behavior changed because they knew they were going to get put back on the slow train. And if there's one thing that motivates engineers and product owners and all of those people who are accountable to metrics, it's being able to deliver on time and go quick. So I have to admit that at the time we put this in place, I was I don't know if this is going to work, but all right. It was wildly successful.
That's amazing.
In terms of a behavior change, which is exactly what we wanted it to do.
But what's I'm sorry.
Yeah, think about the sort of incentives that you put in place for teams to be reliable.
Well,
an error budget kind of works like that, right? It's not that you need an error budget. It's that it's a really good incentive method to hold teams accountable to managing the reliability as much as they manage their features.
And one quick comment, Michael, before you go, is that it just makes my heart so happy to know that there are people who wanted to go fast. They want to get the innovation out there. You said this was a big government agency?
Yeah, but I mean,
right? I mean, this is wonderful. People want to move quickly. People want to get innovation out. That's great.
Well, they will. When you start playing around with ambition, expectation, and tension, okay? So you're creating a set of expectations that's a really productive use of tension. So it's if you ever try I'm going to make 10, I'm going to shoot it I'm going to use the basketball again. I'm going to shoot free throws. I'm going to make 10 in a row. You start to make 5 and you're the tension builds because you're I'm going to have to start over, and you start focusing. So it creates focus, and you want to do it in a way that can recover if you don't make it. So it's like you're not like punished. You're actually incentivized then to, and that's where you actually maybe want to help a group, right? You might want to rotate in more resources or some consultation or coaching to help a group that's not able to kind of do it. And so like that's a really, when you think of a social system, it's like the expectations and the tension, and when people can do that on their own, they feel really empowered, and then they start having fun, and it's a fun thing. And even in the failure, they're going to learn from it. All right, we got to start again, and that's a key point to keeping that system healthy.
Yeah, I'll chime in. Sort of what I've seen talking to our customers is it's interesting. I think there's a lot more familiarity with the SLAs than SLIs and SLOs out there, because I think SLAs have been in contracts forever. And what we are finding now with our customer base is who are basically trying to deliver reliable, mission critical applications and services, is that this whole movement towards SRE, service level indicators, service level objectives, error budgets, it's maybe changing the conversation between the technology groups and the business. And it feels like it opens up an avenue of better understanding, because a lot of, even at Sumo and at our customers as well themselves, the discussion was, there was a gap in understanding because the teams were focusing on alerting on individual failures of technical components underneath the stack, some microservice doing X in a weird way, but it was really hard to translate those into what a customer experience of a customer is seeing as they use the application. And I think we're hearing that a lot of our customers are just trying to, the productive part of this at the beginning is just agreeing on what matters, right? Agreeing on how to talk about this, and then figuring out how to measure it, and then figuring out how to sort of fine tune it and evolve it, as Paula was saying earlier, right? But a lot of this is facilitating a conversation between the technologists and the business people in the company, and it's bringing them closer together, which is a fantastic outcome, I think, generally for businesses, right? Because once you integrate that understanding of what matters to your customers, it goes from the bottom. Like, it's almost like an integrated supply chain, right? It produces better outcomes. So that's something I think that will improve everybody's lives at work and customers as well.
Agreed. And I think that balance, the yin yang, to use some terms that Michael will probably appreciate that Michael was talking about, is, I think that's such an important part of this, to have the ability to sort of have that back pressure against all that stuff that's coming in. So you folks have all sort of done this and helped get it working in organizations. How should folks get started? Where would they start? Obviously, there's probably lots of different places to start. People, technology. Where would we start with this? Finding the right metrics to measure. I mean, these are all things. Who wants to start? Paul, I haven't started with you. I'm going to start with you once.
So one of the things that I like to say is your system will tell you when it's unhappy with you or when it needs a hug, right? And the way that we actually see this is through incidents, right? So the bulk of the work that I do is sort of incident follow-up and retrospectives, and at Netflix, we try to do kind of a deeper, it's a process that's a little unique, and it's a little different than sort of maybe the standard, incident review or retrospective that you may be familiar with. It doesn't always involve a lot of interviews, but the point with the people that were involved to get some good insights into what they were trying to do and the state of the system at the time. But the upshot to that is, I'm a big believer that when you have an incident, you have already paid the cost of that incident, right? You've already paid for it. So you might as well get that return on investment. And we've been talking about SLOs, SLIs, a lot of the improvement in what to monitor and what part of the system is creaky and may need a hug comes from it breaking. And so I'm a big believer that investment there, and investment sort of in incident response, if you're not sure where to start, is a good place, because the system will tell you if you listen to it, right?
And so when you mentioned when you've had the error or the incident, you've already spent the money, so get the return on the investment. I don't know that you finished your thought. The return on the investment there is actually doing the postmortem and learning.
Right. Yeah. So you've already incurred that cost, either in, whether you've kind of disappointed your customers, or sometimes there can actually be a very big financial cost that you could sort of measure, right? And so it's interesting to me that sometimes, because looking at failure can be, difficult to do, and there's always business pressure to kind of move on to do, get back to features and that sort of thing. Sometimes, businesses or teams will not leverage that investment that they've already spent. And that's one of the biggest, that's a good way to explain it to stakeholders. If there is a hesitance to look at, some of that failure, because it's like you've already enrolled in the course, you've already paid for the course, you might as well go to the classes.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way of thinking about that. You've already spent the money, you may as well get the learnings. Awesome. All right, Michael, what are your thoughts on this? Where should folks get started with people? I'm assuming it's going to be with people with you.
Well, it will involve people, but I guess it is people, because you have to look at what's the state of the system, what are the dynamics in play. And I like the framing I saw off a PagerDuty deck this last week on event intelligence, and it's like, are we in a reactive? Are we reactive, responsive, and then it's proactive and predictive? I saw it in the text. I'm giving credit to I really liked the framing on it, and so I think, well, if we're reactive, well, then we got to start asking, like, are we one-dimensional? And usually the group is, right? Are we fatigued? Okay. Is there a lot of signals already coming in, or is nothing coming in? It could be nothing. It could be blind system. And it's like, okay, like, what are we going to do here? Like, how are we going to have kind of a stepwise journey? And so I'm a big fan of like Goldratt and the goal and the theory of constraints. So I'm like, one step at a time. What's our first biggest hindrance? Let's start there. Let's at least conceptualize a little bit of a North Star. Just sit with that a little bit. And so I really try to do stepwise journey, because each time you turn on a signal and create that first back pressure, it's like the team has to like get that in the core, into the culture. And so you kind of want to build that up slowly, one step at a time, and find groups in your company or outside your company that are further along on the journey that you can have conversation with, or you're going to spin. And so it's that dialogue to support that change in thought, and each time adding a signal. You can go read a lot of stuff and it'll show you the exact signals and this and that. I say stepwise, minimalistic, and community driven. That's how I do it.
And that whole idea of finding people who are better at it than you is fantastic. And there are a lot of people out there, at least in my experience, the people that are out there doing these journeys already are more likely to turn around and help other people than in other domains of work that I've been in. This seems to be a very community-oriented sort of type of thing, and I love that. All right, very good. So, Mitch, thoughts on this? Where should folks get started? What's a good place for folks to get started?
I think fortunately this is a situation where you don't have to throw everything out. You can build from where you are, right? Because there's great things already happening. I mentioned in chat I'm on the road this week. I'm not too far from Kennedy Space Center, so I'll give a shortened version of this story. One of the things that we do have to relearn is to embrace failure. Failure is actually a very good thing. And only great things can happen through many, many failures, and we're learning from those failures. So the NASA story is, we all know, failure is not an option from Apollo 13. It's actually not true. It's 100% wrong. Failure is an option. It's people dying is not an option. That's what wasn't an option. And if you think back to the movie, if that's the way you remember it. They tried hundreds of ideas, maybe thousands of ideas to how to figure out, put the scrubbers to the, whatever clean air cleaning systems. And they finally got that. They finally got the air budget, the amperage budget to turn the power back on just through sheer trial and error and learning and learning and learning and learning. And they finally got it. And every one of those failures, they could have never done it without all those failures. And that's what our role is too, is to embrace those failures. Like Paul was talking about, is like, okay, we've already had it. What's that telling us? Are we working on the right bottleneck? Or we need to go, sort of change what we're measuring? What is that, what about the failure is going to inform us about how to improve it, either so it doesn't happen again, or so it's more resilient. So I think that's because I've worked in organizations where managers would not use the word failure. And that was a huge failure on their part. And I was very blunt with them about that. You got to say failure. If you want your folks to work on it and learn from it, you got to say the word.
And you have to be okay with it. You have to show them that you're okay with it. Yeah.
It is.
Give them space.
So VCs, actually, when they're funding companies, consider previous failures, very good as part of the experience of people that are seeking funding, right? Because you learn from failures. You learn how to deal with it, how to recover them from them. Hopefully. Well, that's the theory, right? And I think it's entered the mainstream over there. So
yeah, interesting. Paula, thoughts on this? We also have another one which maybe is a better one, and you can answer either. How do you get started, or I wish I knew, right?
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit both, and I'll kind of build on some great comments earlier, both the sort of embrace failure and really the people dynamic. You shouldn't assume that everybody, the learning organization, I love the dojo concept because I think every organization needs to be a learning organization. If you're a learning organization, you got to give people space to learn. So that's going to be my first tip is, are you running everybody at 100%, or are we giving them enough slack in the system to learn and react to that, incident review or whatever. But once you've got a good, so first is, are you giving people enough space? That's step one. But then once you've given them the space, I think there's some kind of good practices about giving them a framework, right? Because you are training people in something that, this isn't like taught in college, or, this is not something that's actually really widely available to learn.
Not terribly concrete.
Yeah, it's not. And I think there's some great books, but, not everybody reads a book, right? So that's not always the best way. And so one of the things that we have in our sort of framework, we've kept it really simple. So it is digestible from, all the way down to the intern to the senior engineer. And we basically say, like, look, what we're asking you to do when you design the system, we've got this sort of grid of think about, increasing customer impact as one sort of axis of this. And the other one is sort of increasing blast radius of like the failure, right? So failure is going to happen. So the best thing, obviously, you can do, this is the one everybody wants, is the avoid the failure, right? That's obviously something that is very, test it, put in product limits, do design reviews. I think most people stop and we're just going to avoid failure. We're done. Right. And that's good. You should do all those things. If you're not doing those things, if you're not doing some basic things, that's probably a good place to start on reliability. The next, I think, step of that is to mask it. So you have failures, but it's invisible to the user. There's some error handling. There's some, cluster orchestration or something like that, that you're doing something that things fail, but hey, the customer doesn't see it. So it's okay. And that's an acceptable design decision. You can bound it. So this is where like canary deployments or blue-green stuff, right? Where we try something out, and if it does fail, we can roll it back before it gets seen by a lot of folks, doesn't have a big blast radius. The other is a fast rollback, right? That you can, I hate to say we do this a little bit more than I care to admit, maybe in public, where we roll something out and go, whoops, and roll it right back real quick, right? So it does fail.
Fast. That's okay.
Right. That's okay, because it, again, it might have a little bit of customer impact, but we're able to catch it and roll it back before the customer even sees it, right? That's that like that's getting us there. So that's kind of like the framework. And then you can kind of think about that cascading, that's at an individual service level. That's kind of my spectrum, but think about that too. Like, okay, that's the service. What about like, the zone or the availability zone or the region or, so if you think about the sort of lens of like what happens if the whole system goes down versus what happens if this particular service goes down, because ultimately you probably have a whole system that you want to be reliable, but that whole system is only reliable if all the parts that make up the system
right
are also reliable. So we just think of it as sort of this like spectrum of, as a service owner, we ask you to make sure you are doing these things. Are you avoiding it? Can you mask it? Can you bound it? And can you fix it fast? You can do all those things for your service.
Interesting.
Then the next layer is, okay, for a collection of services that make up a capability, can we avoid a failure? Can we, it's not, the fix it fast doesn't really work for a collection of services.
But it's a great framework though. To help
it's a good, so the idea is that, you're trying to sort of like add it all up. And it's not that you're telling, you got to start with the basic, again, if you have stuff that's just falling over, today, fix that for,
right.
the basics first.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
But and I guess maybe the thing is, it's hard because of complexity. If you manage one thing, you'll have to keep one thing up. If it's a lot of things, any one component of the system can be the source of failure.
Interdependent.
So the more things you have involved, the more possible sources of failure. So I think the reality of a modern digital application is there's probably a lot of stuff involved. Right. And that's
the recommendation I'm hearing for you is to just go back to the monolith. Right?
Yeah, you know what? The mainframe.
go for it.
And actually, in fairness, a lot of mainframes are really reliable because they're very simple.
Right.
Just as a point, just that the inherent complexity is itself a failure challenge, right? That you have to sort of design around. So I guess, to kind of circle all this around, the best way to get started is to think about this on the spectrum of where you are and what your capabilities are across all of your services to sort of be able to do all of these things. And that gives you kind of a progressive step of how to get each service kind of down the reliability path.
I like that. Very actionable steps for folks on the call here to take. I love that. We have 3 minutes left, which is not a ton of time. Paul or Michael, Bruno or Mitch, I'm not going to ask you. Paul or Michael, do you have anything that you want to try and wrap up with on any of these topics? I wish I knew. How do you get started? Or
I got a quick one.
Challenges.
I got a quick one. And it's something to think about. The I wish I knew. One of the biggest things, we've talked a lot about failure, and I talked about incidents and looking at incidents. But I would ask everybody, with us here to think about the idea that failure and success are flip sides of the same coin. So we often ask ourselves, why did the system go down? But your people are doing amazing work every day with the system that they operate and maintain to keep it up. And so an interesting question to ask is, why does the system operate as well as it currently does? It's the same failure and success, same different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I would I would agree with that. That's actually a really strong point, that a lot of times we think failure is bad. It's, so I think if we approach this eventually scientifically in our thought, then we end up iterating to a good place. And yeah, I don't want to add anything other than that.
That's good. Yeah, iteration is good. There's Michael's written a really nice blog post you'll be able to see shortly. And I talk about in the forward of the blog post, there's a fellow named Gene Kim. Some of you may know him. Has a fantastic quote that has stuck with me, which is, the quality of the daily work is less important than the improvement in the quality of daily work. And that's a simple way of saying that it's okay wherever you are, it's okay. But you can do better. And if you work at it, you can be better than anyone. And that's powerful. And the same thing with reliability management. Getting the structure in place, giving your teams the space, as we've talked about, taking the time to understand the investment that you've made in these incidents, going back and understanding what was the investment for. These are all fantastic tips. I love the structure that Paula gave to help people understand what modes of failure they need to be aware of for their different services and how to tackle those. Just awesome content, awesome conversation. Thank you all for joining. Thanks everybody in the audience for being here and for participating. It's wonderful to have you here. I did put the $25 Amazon gift card winners in there. There's a QR code on the screen. We're going to be doing this exact same format next month with a different topic and a couple different speakers talking about chaos engineering. So instead of just figuring out how to keep things reliable, we're actually going to talk about how we break stuff to keep it more reliable. So we're looking forward to that conversation as well. Folks, thank you so much for joining. Again, I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy New York.